talk a little bit about the way ahead and what we see happening there in terms of U.S. military forces. Recall that the tasks the ambassador gave us initially are shown here on this particular slide. He asked for a survey and assessment team, and again, the purpose of that team was to go in and take a look at the various aspects of evacuating Americans from Liberia. And so that was done. That team went in, a little more than a week ago. He also asked for some additional security people because of the situation in Monrovia. He had only a handful of Marine guards at the embassy, did not feel like this was sufficient to ensure protection of the people inside the embassy complex, and so he asked for some additional security. That was provided as well. Then at the time, this was weekend before last, he asked us to position forces to prepare for an evacuation, not knowing at the time what kind of an evacuation would be ordered. And recall what's called an authorized departure was ordered, and not an ordered departure. An ordered departure would mean everybody leaves. An authorized departure basically means volunteers leave. But he asked us to, in fact, position forces. That was done, and subsequently they conducted the authorized departure. And we'll talk about the numbers and how many people, how many American citizens here in just a minute. And lastly, the embassy, because of the situation here in Monrovia, sitting out here on the end of a point, being cut off really from the normal sources because it was unsafe to travel outside the embassy, was running low on food and water. So he asked us to resupply the embassy as well. And of course, that's been ongoing now ever since we had forces arrive. To put the size of the force in perspective again, we ended up with about 1,400 total, located at 3 locations. In Monrovia itself, at the embassy, a little short of 200 people went in, the assessment team, security forces, command element for the security forces, and people who were helping with the orchestration of the authorized departure, assisting U.S. Embassy people. So that was what we put into the embassy, and that's about what is there today. In Freetown, which is where we conducted the primary operation from and where we located the helicopters that conducted the operation, remember the distance here was about an hour-and-a-half flight by helicopter. And so we had 11 total aircraft, 9 helicopters, 5 MH-53s, 4 MH-47s involved. Initially, the 53s went in, and then subsequently, as it became a little unclear as to what the situation was going to involve and how many people we were going to have to bring out, the commander on the scene asked for additional helicopters, and so those came from the States. The 53s came from Europe, the MH-47s from the United States. In addition, the command element was there, the Special Operations Forces, and this is the group that did the initial security at the embassy. They were the security force initially. The SEALs, of course, were also part of that initial security force. This initial ready company is a company of light infantry that was to serve as the reserve force back here at Freetown in case the soft people that we'd put in and the SEALs were not sufficient to provide. They needed reinforcement. We had ready reinforcement here to move forward. And in fact, as we sit today, as I'll show you in a minute, it's this initial ready company that is currently providing the security at the embassy. The Special Operations Forces and the SEALs have been withdrawn and are now all back in Freetown, and I'll talk about their disposition here in just a moment. The airlift element is nothing but a group of people who go into a location. You see it here at Freetown and also at Dakar. The purpose of the airlift element is to do nothing but to facilitate the movement of the airlift aircraft as they come through, to be sure that if we have a minor problem with an aircraft, we can fix it, and more importantly, to help and assist in the flow through of those aircraft as they make their deliveries. At Dakar, we had a little over 500 people, closer to 600. These are the kinds of aircraft. That was the total number of aircraft. And again, because of the lack of space here, we really needed to put the assets here that needed to conduct the evacuation. And the support for those aircraft, those helicopters, was positioned back here at a much larger runway with the ability to handle the number of aircraft we needed to put in. The other thing we were trying to do was to keep the ramp here fairly clear so that we could bring airlift aircraft in. If we'd positioned all these forward, we'd taken up all the ramp space, and we couldn't have operated the airlift aircraft in and out of Freetown. So that's the disposition. About 200, around 650, and close to 600 here for nearly a little over 1,400 people.
Will you give us the breakdown of the numbers of aircraft later, General?
On exactly how many of each? If it's useful to you, I can do that, sure. We had a couple of AC-130s, and of course the AC-130 is an aircraft that has guns mounted in it that can be used to protect people on the ground. And of course, as we were going in and out, especially when we initially had some people firing at some of our helicopters, we had those aircraft positioned overhead, and to be honest with you, it stopped the firing. We only had that one firing incident that I briefed you on last time I was down here. And so that was the purpose of the AC-130s, to provide overhead protection. The P-3s were down there, and as I recall, the number of those was about 3. We had a couple of KC-135 tanker aircraft providing assistance there. The MC-130 aircraft, of course, are the Special Operations Force aircraft, and there were, I think, 4 of those. They serve as refueling aircraft for the helicopters, as well as providing assistance, other assistance for the Special Operations Forces. So that's the approximate number. If that doesn't add up to 14, it's relatively close. And I've given you the breakout here of 5, 4, and 2 MC-130s. Okay. Current situation in Monrovia is shown here. Most importantly, at our embassy, I've mentioned to you that the initial ready company, the U.S. Army forces, are now doing the security mission at the embassy along with the Marine Guards. We have the 9 helicopters currently at Freetown. Most of the evacuations were done by the MH-53s, although the 47s got there a little later, but they got into the act at the end. Combination of flights between the two was 83 to conduct the evacuation. You can see the total number of people evacuated, 73 countries represented in the evacuation, of which nearly 450 were American citizens. That's just about the total number of Americans that were there, and I'll try to give you a feel for what we think is left here in just a second. Embassy's reporting everything in the embassy compound is fine. There was an incident that's been reported in which late last week there was a break-in to the ambassador's residence, which is not right on the compound itself. They were chased off. Nobody severely hurt in that exchange. No shots fired by any U.S. military forces. But since that incident, we've not had any problem anywhere with any U.S. facilities. And so that's all going well. Obviously, medicine, food, water, things of those kind have been important to the embassy because right now that is one of the primary sources, although my understanding is that there has been some movement of food around the city now since things have quieted down a little bit, although I think we can characterize the situation there as remaining tense. We don't think the situation is totally resolved, and it could very quickly turn back to be as severe in terms of exchange of gunfire as it was before, if not more so. And so we need to stay prepared. The embassy forces, the forces at the embassy need to remain there to provide adequate security until the situation resolves itself one way or the other with the warring factions. Since the authorized departure is complete, we really have excess capability there now. In terms of numbers of people, we have less than 20 American citizens at the embassy. They're all part of the embassy staff. It's the numbers that the ambassador elected to have remain behind. In terms of Americans that we haven't contacted, that number is also in the neighborhood of less than 15. In terms of people that are out in the countryside or in the city that we have not been able to contact. And I say we, I'm talking about the embassy, obviously. So it's a very small number that have not been contacted. And there are less than 50 Americans who have been contacted, and they've elected to stay. They elected not to be evacuated. So Again, I think when we talk about the number of about 450, that was the original number we thought we had in the first place, and so we're down pretty close to that now, with a small number electing to stay, an even smaller number who we've not been able to contact, and then the embassy staff itself, and that's the substance of that. So with that in mind, the MH-47s and the security forces provided by the initial Ready Company are sufficient to do any future missions that we see there in terms of evacuation. And so the SINC, General Jowlin, has elected to take the MH-53s and the Special Operations Forces and redeploy them back into Europe where they have other tasks they need to get on with. We will retain the MH-47s and the security forces that I described until the Amphibious Readiness Group arrives on Saturday, approximately a Saturday. And once it does, the Marine Expeditionary Unit aboard the Amphibious Readiness Group, aboard the ships, will assume responsibility for the mission, and we will end up redeploying the rest of the ground-based forces, the MH-47s, the security forces, and any other land-based units that went down as part of the initial evacuation. So the ordered departure is the only thing that would remain, and that would be very small numbers of Americans, possibly some third country nationals at the direction of the U.S. government. That is one mission. The second mission that we have at the current time is to provide security at the embassy until that order departure takes place, assuming that happens, or hopefully the situation resolves itself to the point where the Marine Guards can assume security for the embassy again. That's a rundown on what I had for you today in terms of the current situation, where we're going, and what the force changes are going to be here in the immediate future. And with that, I'll take questions. Charlie.
Can you tell us exactly how many U.S. security forces are left in Monrovia itself?
Yeah, I don't want to give you an exact number for obvious reasons. I mean, if somebody knew what was there and they had any designs, they might say, well, if that's all that's there, then we only need this many more. But let me say it numbers in the hundreds. Why don't I just leave it at that?
You said the AC-130s discourage any kind of firing or firefighting on the ground. Did the AC-130s fire any rounds at all?
No, they didn't have to. We had the one incident I described to you when I was down here last week, and that was it. I mean, we haven't had any other incidents involving U.S. forces. So the AC-130s were there. Whether or not they served as a deterrent or not, we have no way of knowing, but we did not have any further incidents after the first one we described to you.
Is anybody, General, talking about or looking at the issue of whether the Marines may do anything more than just protection? Is it strictly an American citizen protection operation or protection of other nationals who want to leave? Or is there any talk about moving beyond that to aiding Liberians who may be in need?
Yeah. Well, you're asking me policy questions that are something to be decided. I'm telling you what the situation is right now. The purpose of our security forces in Monrovia right now is to provide assistance to the ambassador and the 18 people who remain in the U.S. Embassy to ensure that embassy can stay open as long as the conditions are such that the ambassador feels he can retain the staff there. So that's the purpose of the security force that is resident at the U.S. Embassy, and they're all resident inside of the compound.
Remains undecided as opposed to decided against.
I'm telling you that's the mission as it's stated today. What happens in the future, I'm not saying that there are plans to change it. I'm not trying to hedge my bet here, don't get me wrong. I'm telling you what the mission is. I can't read what's going to happen a week, a month from now. I don't know what the situation will be and what decision will be made by this government, but I'm telling you what the mission is as I stand before you today.
So as of now,
Are there considerations to deploying another ARG from the States to take up position in the Mediterranean? Or you
that's a good question. And, you know, we're deploying 5 ships now. And you say, my goodness, 5 ships. That sounds like a lot of ships for what we have left to do here. The reason that's happened is when we deploy the Amphibious Readiness Group to go to Europe, it goes for a specific set of missions for a 6-month period. And so it configures for those missions. And recall that the Guam Amphibious Readiness Group has been associated with the operations in Bosnia, and in fact it served as a theater reserve for the early phases of the operation and will in the later phases of the operation, whatever Amphibious Readiness Group happens to be there. And it's going to be the Essex is the one to replace the Guam here in a little while. So it configured to do that mission as the primary task. That configuration in the ships was not set properly for this kind of an operation. And so we needed some helicopters. We weren't sure what we needed in terms of the amphibious type vehicles they have, as well as the wheel type vehicles, all which were resident on different ships. And so not knowing at the time we asked this unit to move down, they took a little of everything with them, and it happened to be on different ships. And so that's why you see the number of ships going down that you see going down. Now, does it make any sense to retain this group of ships off the coast based on the mission we have? Probably not, and we're in the process of looking at other options now. This will be up to General Jolin and his staff in Europe to determine what alternatives are satisfactory to them to accomplish the mission that's been passed to them by the Secretary of Defense.
What about early deployment of another ARG, though?
Well, I can't tell you what the option is going to be. I mean, we try to stick very carefully to what we call the deployment schedule. We call it the Global Naval Force Presence Policy, and we want to be sure that we don't get that out of kilter, because if you do, it affects other deployments later on. If it needs to be done for operational reasons, we'll do it. No question about that. An option is to deploy the next amphibious readiness group early, but there are many, many other alternatives. And I would think that would be the least likely, because the next amphibious readiness group going to Europe is going specifically to be there in the Mediterranean area and will serve again in Bosnia as the theater reserve and be configured to do that during the withdrawal phase in Bosnia. So we want to keep them on course for the training. They've got a very important mission coming up during their deployment, and we want to make sure they get all the training necessary to get that done. If we deploy it early, it cuts back on the training schedule that they have available to them. So I would say that there are other alternatives available. Those are being looked at, and when it's just decided, if in fact we decide to bring the Guam ARG out, we'll be down here telling you what we're going to do.
Just a clarification, I'm a little confused. Will the pave lows wait till the ARG gets on station before they deploy back to Europe, or are they already deployed?
No, they're in the process of breaking down for deployment. General Jolin has determined that the MH-47s he has there are sufficient to do the mission that he has, in addition, and the security forces that are there as well, and that he can redeploy the MH-53, the Pavlo helicopters, and that's in the process of going on right now. Yes, sir.
At the risk of asking kind of a dumb question, the people you haven't been able to contact, do you have any idea what happened to them?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I wish I did. And again, the embassy has made every attempt to contact everybody, and they may have the numbers off a little bit. They think there are people there. You know, with the situation we had in Monrovia, there's no question that some people decided it was safer to go somewhere else while this war was going on. So they may be off in various places hiding, or they may be with friends, and so there's just no way to find them at this point in time. The embassy's making every attempt, and has been since the beginning of this operation, with their people at the embassy who have been able to go out, make contact with Americans where they know they are, and try to get them to a place where they can be picked up and withdrawn, those that choose to leave.
Suspicion that any of them are dead?
Absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. We know of no condition that would say that was the case.
Just to follow up, have any of the Americans you evacuated, were any of them hurt in any way by the violence?
Again, I know of no incident involving an American in which an American was injured in any way. I know of none, and I would have seen reporting if that were the case. We had a number of people who were evacuated, and most of these, in fact, I don't know of any that were American citizens, but most of them third country nationals, many of them women and children, who had traveled some distance under very, very difficult circumstances, that were very dehydrated and needed medical attention when they got to the U.S. Embassy. Fortunately, the SEALs are trained in providing that kind of an assistance, as well as some people at the embassy, and they were able to give medical attention to these people. You saw a lot of them getting off of helicopters, and they looked pretty shaken. as you would expect from going through this kind of a situation. But that's the only element I've heard of any, and that was just the fact of the heat, the distance traveled, lack of food, lack of water.
This initial ready company, who are they and where were they based?
Yeah, they're based in Italy, and it's the 3 of the 325th. Yeah, it's this.
Back from Bosnia?
They are.
A company down there?
Yeah, the company.
Did all the troops who ended up in Liberia, were they all from Europe, or did any come from stateside?
No, all of the troops that ended up down there, be it special forces or the initial ready company of the unit in Italy, they're all based in Europe.
So you had the guys from Italy, you had some Navy SEALs, and you said some special forces?
Right.
Okay. Were there any other guys, did Delta people deploy or anything like that
They would
sort?
have come from the States. Everybody came from Europe. Okay. Any other questions?
Implied this, but you haven't said it. Since there are hundreds, as you put it, or several hundred security troops in Monrovia now, when the ARG arrives, will several hundred Marines go ashore to replace those troops?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the intent will be to provide the security in exactly the same way that it's being provided now. I mean, the security requirement is what it is, and so we will make that change. The Marine Expeditionary Unit has sufficient forces to be able to carry out this task, has sufficient Marines on board to do this security mission.
Is the plan that all of the Marines on board, I think it's 1,400 or 1,500, go ashore?
No. I mean, we got the same mission now, and that's to protect the embassy, really to protect the people in the embassy. I keep saying the embassy. The embassy is not what's important, it's the people in it. And so that takes X number of people. That's what we'll put ashore, no more, no less. I mean, that's the intent, and that's the commander's judgment as to what that entails. And so we'll wait and see what happens. Jamie.
Properly configured, could a single ship perform this mission?
You know, again, that's not for me to say standing here. I mean, I could easily make a guess, but the assessment process of what it takes to do the mission is up to the SYNC. I mean, that's what we have the SYNC out there for. I sit back here in Washington behind a desk. I don't know what's going on down there. We leave it up to the people there to make the decision. I can tell you we will try to do this in a way that makes sense with a minimum force in terms of making sure we have enough there to do the job, but there's no sense in putting a force down there way beyond the capability requirements that they're laid out to do the mission as it's stated now.
The
Got
53.
everybody? Yeah, okay, let's go back over
53s
here.
and 47s, did they fly all the way down from Europe, or did they?
No, we took them down, and yeah, we used the Transportation Command's airlift, and they were moved by C-5 aircraft. In fact, the C-5s were very, very busy and flew a utilization rate higher than they normally do in carrying out this particular mission of moving these helicopters. And we don't talk much about our Transportation Command, but I'll tell you, from where I sit, we watch the operation go on, and all these people arrive, and they do this great job, and they've gotten a lot of praise for the work that they did in support of this operation. But we got to remember there were people moving all of these folks, delivering them, and it's done with a C-5 aircraft, the C-17 and the C-141. In this particular case, there are sea-lift involved in other operations, but in this particular case, it was airlift, and it did a great job of getting their assets positioned. The Transcom did. Transportation Command, and making this happen.
And the last question is, do you know what the schedule right now for the Essex group is? Do you know when they're scheduled to go out?
Yeah, I don't have it here. It's sometime in the summer, so I mean, you know, you can almost figure it out if you know the time that the Guam deployed. It will run 6 months on its deployment, so you can sort of, you know, when it deployed. I've even forgotten the exact date, but it's sometime in the summer. And I'm saying Essex, my recollection is that's right. If it isn't, I'll come back and correct that for you. Okay, thank you.